Do you have insurance?
We are talking UNHUMAN. This one is directed and co-written by Mark Dunstan, who previously brought us The Collector and The Collection, two movies that I'm actually quite a big fan of. And here he's turning his attention to the zombie genre. And this one is positioned to be a cross between The Breakfast Club meets the zombie apocalypse. Now, to give you a brief synopsis, it focuses on a group of high schoolers, all of whom are from different kind of social kind of groups, the popular jocks down to the kind of the you know, the geeky nerds and everything, and they are kind of on a field trip, and there is seemingly an accident, and this may have been caused by the zombie apocalypse. As it appears, there are undead zombies roaming in the woods, and it's up to this kind of this group of survivors really to try and get away from this potentially undead menace. Now, they hold up in this kind of seemingly abandoned buildings, but they are under siege. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss UNHUMAN. Now, as I mentioned, the director here is responsible for the Collector and Collection movies, of which I thought were quite intelligent kind of slasher films. So I was kind of surprised when I was starting to watch this film, because it's very different in kind of tone. It almost feels like a kind of a pop video, or a kind of like something you'd find on YouTube, you know, with these kind of like MTV style kind of edits and flashy sort of colours and tonal kind of shifts and things like this. It's a rather bizarre film. It's certainly a kind of a horror comedy, not really played particularly straight, or at least for the most part, because there are sequences, and I would say it could maybe kind of like the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, that are played more straight, but there are other sequences that I would feel that tonally it's a little bit different. So it's kind of like a bit of an odd one in some ways. It focuses on our main character called Eva, who is this somewhat of a wallflower, I suppose she's positioned to be. What do I think? What do I like about this movie? Okay, so without kind of going into any kind of spoilers or anything like that, the movie kind of has a somewhat of a change of direction partway through the movie, and it makes it, what was up until that point seemingly a generic zombie movie, into something a little bit more interesting. As I've said, this movie has kind of been compared to the Zombies Meet the Breakfast Club. I'd kind of go more along the lines of, it kind of feels like a kind of a zombie film meets the Scream franchise in some respects. So yeah, I kind of quite like the kind of the change in direction here, and it gave it a little bit of its own identity and a little bit more of originality to it. What else is good? I do think I kind of like some of the kind of the practical effects here. They work pretty well in the kind of the context of the movie, and you know, it's not overly kind of, there's not loads of special effects on display here, but I've got to say what they do use, I think is done to a kind of a good kind of standard. And the movie is kind of quite fast paced as well. So I think the pacing is fairly good. It has a relatively kind of large cast of characters, and I feel that, you know, it spends a reasonable amount of time with all of them. So, you know, the majority of our main characters, I think, get a good amount of screen time. So there's one not really that's left and out in the cold so much. And like I said, I will say it has some originality to it, although it won't be immediately apparent kind of when you first watch that. But I've got to be honest with you, there's something about this movie that didn't really gel with me. Again, without kind of spoilers here, I think part of the problem is the tone was a little bit kind of jarring for me at times. Like I've said, it feels like a music video, or something like a skit that like a comedy troupe would do, and try to be self-referential with the kind of the obviously the horror genre and zombie genre in kind of particular. But the main thing I think that really bothered me was I really didn't particularly get attached to any of these characters, and so far as to say, I actually think some of the characters that we are supposed to like are actually a little bit unlikable. Our main character Eva, you know, she's meant to be this kind of somewhat of a wallflower. But I gotta be honest with you, I found her kind of quite grating. I found the way she was written, the way she was kind of like, you know, the actor's kind of performance, to be, you know, not a particularly kind of relatable character, not a particular kind of likeable character, but the movie thinks she is. You know, there's again, I don't want to kind of spoil any kind of sequences for you, but there's sequences that happen in the movie that I think the film wants us to kind of get behind the character and, you know, and kind of show you this kind of, this character's journey from maybe the meek kind of like wallflower type into more of an assertive kind of like lead character. But I always found the character sort of smarmy, unlikable, kind of somewhat kind of like bossy and arrogant. It didn't really gel for me the way this character was, how the movie thinks it's portraying her, and how it was at least portrayed to me. Now some people may have different opinions about that, but it just didn't work for me. But it isn't just her. I feel some of the other characters as well, who we're meant to be a little bit more sympathetic with, don't really work in that respect. So there's that problem as well. And the movie deliberately tries to have these stereotypes. You know, again, the kind of the jock, the kind of the pretty mean girl, you know, the nerds, the wallflower, those sort of things. And again, they feel like stereotypes. Now the film is trying to make commentary about that, but as you're kind of watching it, you don't, you know, that's not immediately kind of apparent. And these film characters just feel like very, very stereotypical kind of stock characters and not particularly likeable ones. And because of the weird sort of like hyperactive tone in the movie, again, it's hard to really kind of relate to them because you don't really know how you're supposed to take the film. Are you kind of supposed to take it seriously? Because there are moments when this movie does veer into that, and you are meant to have a bit more of dramatic tension and things like that. Now, I will say I think that the movie does pick up in the third act. But oh boy, does it end on a kind of a damp squid. I like the third act. I like the kind of the direction that it goes in. But the actual climax of the action is cringeworthy. Cringeworthy. And then we have this protracted epilogue that I feel is like, you know, Return of the King level, unnecessarily kind of long kind of sequence where I didn't really feel it needed to kind of go anywhere. So it didn't stick the landing, unfortunately, even though it threatened to become a little bit more of an interesting movie in the kind of the third act. It kind of, I think it, you know, it maybe not all the way, but it somewhat kind of squandered its goodwill for me in kind of some respects. And you know, it's not as interesting as I think it thinks it is. The characters aren't as likable as they think they are. And yes, it has an original element, but it does take a while to get there. And to be honest with you, the first two-thirds of the movie are kind of generic in some respects, because it just feels like a kind of typical zombie film, but with kind of unlikable characters and you know, an uneven tone. So I'll give this movie props for having some originality within that kind of the change of direction, as I've mentioned, but you know, it's not enough to give this movie make it a good film overall, unfortunately. I actually felt this movie is quite annoying to watch in some ways. But I'll give it a 4 out of 10. To me, it's kind of a slightly below average movie, without necessarily being a completely terrible movie or a bad movie, but just not as good or clever as it thinks it is. And certainly I think that the characters here are misjudged. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.